Hi, everyone. Thanks for dialing in. We are just going to begin in about 2 minutes to allow for others to join as well. Thank you. Okay, I think we can go ahead and begin. I'm sure others will join as we are moving along. So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session with Gameloft on gamification. Before we get started, a little light housekeeping. Please use the chat or Q&A box provided below to submit your questions. If you would like to verbally ask a question, please use the raise hand function and you will be unmuted, but all questions will be fielded at the conclusion of this presentation. Now let's begin. Today's webinar title is Gamification, where psychology and technology intersect. Great games compel us to play. They get in our heads and motivate us to come back and try again. Gamification applies to those compelling game mechanics to a business objective, resulting in desired audience action. So, what does this mean for your brands? It means that your goals can be converted into an interactive and actionable experience that delivers the best of all worlds. Fun immersion, education, favorability, positive association, and real-world meaningful results. To join us as Casey Campbell, Managing Director from Gameloft for Brands, to discover different approaches for gamification and best use cases from beauty to education and everything in between. Welcome, Casey.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Let me just minimize this here. So yes, thanks everybody for joining. I hope you can see me and hear me okay, but if that's not the case, please let me know. So yes, gamification is the topic for today. So let's get started. I'm Casey Campbell. I'm with Gameloft, and we're one of the world's biggest mobile games publishers. And we're part of the Vivendi Group, which is a media conglomerate that includes Universal Music Group and also Studio Canal. And Gameloft's primary business is that we have a closed, owned and operated network of games in a lot of different genres. Now, we started advertising in our games about 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, back then, the digital budgets that clients were spending on mobile were maybe like 5 to 10% of the overall digital spend. So a lot of things have changed in that time. But we saw that we had a lot of early success and very strong KPIs advertising in our games network. But there was a demand for us to build small branded playable ads to run in our games. And because we were a games company, we had the experience in-house to do that. And so the demand was so great and so consistent that we eventually built a creative studio of over 100 people. And we took those people from our specialized games teams. And now that studio works exclusively on making gamified content for brands. So that's a little bit of background. I just want to share a little bit more about Gameloft with you before we get started, really. So that was 5 years ago. And now we've worked on thousands of campaigns for leading global brands. And that's running standard display and rewarded video games in our network, but also a good deal of that was creating fun and compelling and engaging media where we use our expertise in gamification and building game experiences and our understanding of a gaming audience, and we use that to tell a good story for the brand. And then we bring our audience into that story as participants where they're playing with the brand's content. Okay? So in some cases, this meant taking an existing video asset and then re-editing it so that it was a branching path video so that the player could decide what would happen next in that video. In other cases, this meant taking very valuable existing company assets like Tony the Tiger or Toucan Sam, and building a playable ad around them that would fit into a larger campaign that was sort of a cross-platform campaign on TV and web. And then most recently, we've actually built out a complete app based on gamification principles for early childhood education and health and wellness for a global CPG brand. And here's just a snapshot of some of the brands that we've worked with worldwide. So this session is called Gaming and Psychology. So what do the video game guys know about psychology? Well, that's a fair question. In order to get here, we've had to adapt and anticipate change in one of the most dynamic and competitive industries around. And each point in the graphic here on this slide represents a massive industry warping disruption. And they've come at a rapid fire pace, as you can kind of see here. So when we started making games, they were on WAP and Java phones. The screens were very small. The input devices were very small. There were the keys and a couple of maybe cursor keys on there. And the distribution of our games was through a wireless operator like Rogers or Telus or Bell or Verizon. You know, with the advent of the iPhone and the popularity of touchscreen devices, we really had to adapt to that and change how we were allowing our audience to interact with our games. So we had to make everything optimized for touchscreens. The distribution model changed to the OTT stores, the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. And then as things went on, we see evolutions that included VR and AR, hyper casual games where the game's experiences were very simple, but almost 100% ads driven. And now in 2020, we're seeing games emerge as social platforms. So a lot of changes in a short period of time, and games companies like Gameloft have had to really be adaptive when it comes to dealing with those changes. I've been in the mobile games industry since 2005, so not since the very beginning, but long enough to have been a disruptor and then been ourselves disrupted. And one of the most disruptive things that happened was the shift to free-to-play gaming around 2011 when the App Store was really building out its catalog of games. So it used to be that we would make a game and it would be a complete narrative. It would have a beginning and it would have an ending, and we'd sell it for $3 or $5 or $7. And then when things shifted to the free-to-play model, which by the way, resulted in this massive explosion of popularity of mobile games when everything was free to download, you know, that really created a challenge for us because when your product is free, you need to find ways to motivate your users towards a deeper engagement and to get your users to engage more frequently and re-engage. And, you know, you hopefully get them invested enough that they're willing to spend real world money in getting more out of that experience. And so this presented new challenges, as I said, understanding our audience, understanding what compels their behavior within a game, and understanding how the mechanics that we were using in those games would help them get more of what they wanted from the experience. And what we found, and what the industry has found, is that there are universal drivers when it comes to compelling human engagement. And the mechanics that we were using within our games were actually really effective when they were applied outside of a video game environment. So that's where we're coming from. Just to quickly go over the agenda today, we'll talk about gamification. We'll talk about what's going on in the brain when you're playing a game and what that means for business applications of gamification and for brands. And then at the end, I'd like to show you some case studies of projects that we've built and campaigns we've actually executed. So you'll see some real life examples of what we've talked about. And then after that, we'll take some questions. So keep your questions in mind. Okay, so the term gamification is accredited to a game designer and programmer named Nick Pelling from 2002. And the definition, according to Nick Pelling, would be the use of game elements and mechanics in non-game contexts for user engagement and problem solving. And we can get into that a little bit more. So here's a game versus gamification. Now, gamification doesn't turn, for example, an application or a process into a game. It just makes it feel like a game. So the definition here is a video game is an electronic game that involves interaction with a user interface. You get visual feedback, and it shows all the different medium for that. So, sorry, it's a pretty sterile definition of a game, but there are lots of studies to confirm that the majority of North Americans will now play games in some form multiple times during the week. So if you're among them, you know that there's something entertaining and something compulsive about a good game, and it almost feels addictive. You want to go back to it when you have a moment, you want to spend more time there. And mobile games are actually designed with this in mind. So they're created to accommodate shorter play sessions. Your mobile device is always with you. So when we're designing these games, we don't really know if you're sitting on your couch and you have a couple of hours to play, or if you're out and around and, I don't know, maybe waiting for a bus or something and only have a few short minutes. So when we design our games, we design them in short loops of engagement, because we don't know how long you have, and we don't want to have to interrupt the gameplay experience if you have to stop, right? And because they're designed in those short loops, it makes it easier to feed that compulsion and to put a little bit more time in and make progress. So anyway, games are the product, and the techniques of making a game feel compulsive and fun and addictive, but that can be applied to things that are not video games, and maybe not something that's purely entertainment, but something else for business purposes or whatever. That's gamification. So games are the product, and then gamification is the process. And there are a variety of mechanics in gamification toolbox that we use in the context of video games, and we've learned some things here. So for example, we've learned that in order to keep our audience engaged, we need to provide them with reasons to keep coming back. And we found that providing challenges and awarding experience points and other rewards for beating those challenges gives our players a feeling of structured progression. And really, people are, they're sort of hardwired to look for progression, to look for progress when they're devoting time and energy into an activity. And so our games economy is built around encouraging that kind of progression and making it frictionless by offering boosts and advantages that you can pay for real money. And also we found that there's a natural desire to apply your skills and then be recognized for your skills as they get better through competition. So we've built in mechanics around competition, and that includes leaderboards, for example. We have special events and tournaments that keep our players coming back to practice their skills first and foremost, and then to work their way up in the competition, work their way up on the leaderboards, and then to come back again to defend their status on those leaderboards. And honestly, in the pandemic year of 2020, that idea of drive towards status is more relevant than ever, because games are now social platforms that allow players to share their experiences. And we've seen this in games like Fortnite and Animal Crossing, which made a real impact on the marketing and advertising world. So we build in customization options. For example, you can build out your own avatar, make it look the way that you want and make it behave the way you want. And this builds a sense of attachment to that avatar. And then we give people a chance to compete and cooperate with their friends, make the experience shareable and discoverable on social channels so that we can engage not only this player, but their larger social circle. So we've learned from games design how to motivate certain behaviors in this context. So those are in gaming applications, but let's look at something that's not necessarily strictly a game, and that would be Duolingo. So Duolingo is a really popular app for learning languages. And if you want to learn Spanish, then you can do this in Duolingo. And if you want to learn Klingon or High Valyrian from Game of Thrones, Duolingo is there to help you do that as well. But Duolingo has seen a massive upsurge during the pandemic. And I remember I used to play this game called Skyrim on my PlayStation. It was an RPG game. And I looked at the stat screen and realized at one point that I put in 300 hours on Skyrim. I thought, well, this has been fun, but I mean, for 300 hours, I probably could have learned a language. And if Duolingo had been around, I would have learned a language. So there are people that have been spending time at home looking for productive ways to spend their time. And Duolingo has seen a massive upsurge. And Duolingo is pretty famous for successfully using gamification principles. So let's take a closer look at that. For an app like Duolingo, engagement is absolutely key, right? because you can't learn a language if you're inconsistent. The language won't stick. So they need to motivate their users to keep coming back to Duolingo and keep spending time in there. And not for nothing, but their monetization depends on this as well. So the free version of Duolingo is ad supported. So obviously you need a robust and consistent audience in order to monetize, a lot of impressions. Now Duolingo makes most of its revenue through the subscription model. And really it's the same thing. If you're not consistently engaged, if you're not seeing progress, if you're not being fulfilled by the experience, you're not going to keep your subscription. So even though it's an educational tool and not strictly a game, you'll see the same techniques that we use being used by Duolingo. So you'll get rewards in form of badges and achievements as you level up, as you learn. And as you make progress, and you get your chance to pick your own avatar. So there's a light little bit of customization there. And then there's also some social integration where we have challenges and achievements and leaderboards and that sort of thing. So the subject matter itself, learning a language, it's fulfilling, but it isn't intrinsically fun necessarily. And making it visually interesting goes a long way. And I think Duolingo's done a good job with this. But adding these game mechanics makes it feel like a game. And it just has a bigger purpose than entertainment. The bigger purpose is learning a language. So let's take another look here at another example. Probably recognize this, but it's the Starbucks rewards. So Starbucks rewards program is one of the most successful reward programs in history. And when it launched in particular, I mean, it was very innovative. It was very inviting. The question is, what keeps people coming back for more here? And it's engagement. Starbucks has its own currency system within the application. It's these little stars. And as you complete their challenges, you'll get more stars. And as you spend money through the app, you'll get more stars. And the stars can be used to redeem coffee or food or whatever you like from Starbucks. So now Starbucks rewards app is all in. There's a Starland section where you can play these engaging little mini games and you can earn more stars and then you get more free stuff from Starbucks. So it's really had a massive impact on their revenue, increase in revenue by $2.65 billion. The membership has grown a lot by 25% in just the last 2 years. And 40% of the sales at the US stores, at least, can be directly traced back to users who are using the rewards program in the app. And the revenue rose 4.6% during the quarter from the previous year. A lot of this is attributed to a successful rewards program. So let's take a peek under the hood and see how gamification actually works within someone's brain and the impacts and the benefits of adding gaming elements to your process. Now, this is a good quote from Gabe Zuckerman. He's a pioneer when it comes to gamification. And he says that gamification is 75% to 25% psychology to technology. And the psychology is important, but applications are becoming easier and the technology is making it easier to deliver the application. So what's changed and why is gamification more important now? Well, people might not know this, but the mobile gaming audience is now absolutely massive. And games in particular, in terms of revenue, are the biggest entertainment vertical. So games, not just mobile games, but games together, last year accounted for more revenue than cinema and music combined. And according to Ad Exchanger, 2.6 billion people will play a game of some form in 2020. And that's 1/3 of the world's population. So more people are playing games now, and more people are coming to understand the language of gaming than ever before. And they get these mechanics, they recognize them, and they know how to participate within these mechanics. And the ideas of challenge and progression and reward for motivation is embedded in the mainstream now. So that's the psychology part. Now, when it comes to the technology, the majority of online interaction is happening with mobile devices. And that means a more tactile approach to consuming content. So you're not just reading something or viewing something. Now you can touch it and you can interact with it. And because mobile devices are always with us and they're always on, this means that we have the ability to deliver an interactive message in an entertaining way at any time to a massive audience. So let's take a look at what's happening within your brain when you're playing a game. So one thing that happens is as you're playing, the brain releases oxytocin, and this creates feelings of trust and empathy within the user. And it's known as the warm and fuzzy hormone. Another thing that happens is that your hippocampus is stimulated, and this drives recall. So when you're engaged in a game, you're really remembering what activity you're engaged in. And games also release the neurotransmitter dopamine. And this is particularly during the reward phases because dopamine is associated with feeling of pleasure. And because the reward phase generates dopamine, the lead up to that reward phase, the anticipation of the reward phase creates a lot of focus in the user. And I mean, this is anecdotal, but if you've ever tried to have a conversation with somebody when they're playing a mobile game or any kind of game, rather than just passively watching a TV program, it's almost impossible to get their attention. They're really focused on the activity at hand and they're really focused at what they're doing. So here you have a player, they're highly engaged, their brain is flooded with dopamine and endorphins. It's probably a good time to communicate a message to them and have that message stick. And when we see these reactions in the brain, we can identify some drivers for human behavior, some core drivers. And I'll run through these pretty quickly, but here are 8 core drivers that we see when someone's engaged with a game. So the first is epic meaning and calling. And you'll see that even simplistic games will have some sort of overarching narrative, some sort of story behind them. That's to make the player feel like a hero. It makes the player feel as though they're part of something that's bigger than them and they're playing an active role in driving that forward. And the second is development and accomplishment. I mean, we kind of talked about that, but people want to feel as though they're making progress and getting something done when they're spending their time. Now, the third point is empowerment of creativity. And in a lot of games, even if they're action-oriented games, the idea is that you need to find solutions to problems. Okay, so you need to try different combinations of things. You need to figure things out. You need to solve a problem, and that's empowering the creative drive within people. The fourth point is ownership. And this means that when you've invested in something, when you own something, you're driven to improve it and make it better. And in the games context, this could mean, taking your little party of Lego men in Lego Legacy game and leveling them up. And so they become the most powerful, like little Lego characters that you can have in the game. Or it could be building your virtual theme park in Disney Magic Kingdoms. You're adding attractions and you're making the park more fun for the little virtual people that are playing around in it. But it's the drive to engage so that you've improved what you have. Now, social influence, this driver, it incorporates all the social elements that motivate people, acceptance, social response, companionship, competition, the reasons that we talked about earlier, why people would come back and try and improve their standing and their status within a game. Now, scarcity and impatience, when it comes to game design, honestly, this is a little bit of a dirty trick. This is the drive of wanting something because you can't have it. And a lot of games have a mechanic where you'll reach a certain point and then you have to stop and you have to wait for a timer, or you can pay to make the timer go away. So we find that this is a motivator. And then unpredictability and curiosity. As you're working your way through the game, you don't know what happens next. And when the brain doesn't know what's going to happen next, there's a fixation happens and your brain is engaged and thinks about it more often. And now lastly, loss and avoidance. This could simply mean worrying about losing your progress, worrying about losing your status on a leaderboard. What happens if you don't participate, if you don't re-engage? And these are all drivers that we use. Okay, so we have the physiological reactions in the brain, and we see the behaviors that they create. And now, in order to harness those to meet a business objective, good gamification is created on 3 main pillars, and that's purpose, motivation, and design. So starting with purpose, the purpose of the gamified process needs to be very clear. So we know that the overall umbrella objective is engagement. But what do you want that engagement to do? So what are the resulting behaviors that are going to help you? And for marketers, will it be social sharing? I mean, do you want to spread the word about a new product launch? Will it be branding to create that emotional bond, that connection between the brand and their audience? Or will it be customer loyalty, like an incentivized program to drive repeat purchases? So the purpose should be very, very clear. Now, motivation comes down to what techniques could be used in the process to keep the user engaged and interested. So this could be leaderboards and competition. This could be more tangible rewards like discounts. In the mobile game space, we often have rewarded ad units, so rewarded videos or rewarded playables. And when we do this, there's a real sense of instant gratification when the player, the audience, engages with the ad, and then they get something back for it, and they can spend those in-game rewards to make the gaming experience better by leveling up their character or unlocking content or unlocking levels or whatever that is. And lastly is the design of the experience in order to make good on all of this. And that's where the expertise comes in. So I've covered a lot of stuff in the last few minutes, a lot of concepts. I hope it wasn't too dry for you, talking about dopamine and the hippocampus and stuff. But it's important to remember that the design objective is fun, right? So games are fun, and gamification can make learning a new language fun. It can make buying more coffee fun. All that brain chemistry stuff and the analysis of human drivers, we're really just drilling down into what makes people associate an activity with having fun. And that's what gamification is really all about.
Oh, great. Thanks, Casey. I've jotted down a few questions myself, but for anyone who's been following along, you can use that Q&A box or the chat box, or simply raise your hand and I will unmute you so that you can ask your question. And we have one in the chat box now.
Now, I know that sounded like I was done, but I still have some more content if you want to wait to the end, or we can take some questions now, whatever you like.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. That's okay. No problem. Now, what I have here is a summary of study results from Havas. And Havas is one of our sister companies. And Havas is very invested in studying and creating meaningful content that connects brands with audiences. And they've asked this question looking into public perception about how entertaining content can improve life. And what's interesting here is that out of these 6 categories, healthcare scored the lowest at 37%, but our experience is that healthcare is one of the most active verticals when it comes to gamification. So in our experience, I mean, Gameloft has mapped out ways to motivate users to manage their diet through an app, and in turn then manage their diabetes symptoms, for example. Another thing that we worked on concepting was an app for doctors, and it's pressure sensitive tablets that they'd be using for this, but it helps them practice their biopsy technique, because when it comes to biopsies, the technique is very important when it comes to the quality of the tissue sample that results from biopsy and its effectiveness in detecting issues with the tissue sample. And in fact, Gameloft has right now a game live online for a big pharma company. And the objective of this game to show doctors in an interactive way, in a very visual way, how S1P receptor modulators will help control inflammation from overactive autoimmune conditions. So it's like a tower defense game, but instead of fighting off knights and catapults and archers and that sort of thing, you use these towers, and the different towers control different lymphocytes as they migrate through the lymph nodes. So again, it's very interactive, it's very visual, and it's a very helpful tool for showing doctors how this works. And the most popular vertical here would be education, and especially during pandemic times and kids are out of school. I know my kids have their curriculum supplemented by stuff like Prodigy and ABC Mouse. Education is really prevalent when it comes to gamification, but education can also mean training. And there are a couple of really cool examples I like from Walmart, actually. Walmart has an app that you can download now. You can try it if you like, but it's called Spark City. And it's basically a store management simulator. It teaches you how to manage a Walmart. And that was the brainchild of one of their employees. And to their credit, Walmart went ahead and built it and launched it. So it's available now, and you can see it if you'd like. Another really cool example from Walmart was a project that they did for their distribution centers. And what they did was they made available through an app a number of different little mini games, and these were puzzle games and word games, that kind of thing. And they were in 3-minute increments. But interspersed in the gameplay was safety questions. So questions about safety process and safety procedures. And the idea was that you play this for 3 minutes, and they decided on 3 minutes because it was optimal for knowledge retention. So you can remember things a lot better if you're learning them in 3-minute increments than if you sat through a long, like 2-hour safety seminar. Now, the other reason they used the 3-minute format was because it takes 3 minutes to recharge a forklift battery. So when the forklift operator would drop off the forklift to get the battery recharged, instead of having that be downtime, they could play around with these games. And there were leaderboards and competitions. So they were competing with one another to see who could do the best on the quizzes. And then they were being productive during that 3 minutes. And what they found was this pilot project was in a few different locations. It involved about 5,000 employees over 6 months. But during the pilot period, the safety incidents in those pilot locations dropped by 54%. So it was really validating that this approach was working really well, and it was a fun approach and an engaging approach. And so they expanded that pilot to a bunch of different locations. So we've covered the foundations for gamification, talked about a few examples of application in business, but what does this mean for advertisers? And these days, advertising gets a bit of a bad rap. If we look at new media consumption models, so streaming models for video and for music, there's a premium placed on removing the advertisements. So when we gamify the way that brands interact with their audience and consumers, we make the brand interaction fun so they want to interact. So it strengthens the emotional bond, the emotional connection to those brands. And we live in a noisy world. So there are 5 billion pieces of content shared on Facebook every day. And there are 500 hours of content uploaded to YouTube every minute. And there are 2 million apps available right now, mobile apps. So brands need interesting content to cut through the clutter of this landscape and to get the audience's attention, and providing a fun interaction is a really good way to do that. And there was a study by TrackMaven a while back, and it said that brand content output has increased by about 35%, while engagement with that content has decreased by 17%. And what this means is there's a lot of throwing content out there and seeing what sticks, right? So brands are exploring new channels, exploring new ways of communicating with their audiences. If you give your audience content that connects with them and engages them, this is going to pay off dividends when it comes to creating an emotional bond, creating rapport. And once that relationship's established, there are real advantages for retention and loyalty and repeat purchases. And the proof is here. I mean, gamification has been used to a lot of success. It's no longer an out there concept whatsoever. And this is a report by Demand Gen, where they talked to marketers about how they felt about gamification, and they felt pretty good about it. 93% loved gamification. 81% thought that interactive content's more attention grabbing versus static content. And around 70% believe that interactive content's successful at converting visitors. So there's some real world results and some real world benefits that we can see. So there's no real complete industry consensus on the definition of engagement. But the aim is to measure, is the user interacting with your brand in a meaningful way? And there are so many ads everywhere that the more quality time you can get with this audience, the better, right? And it's really a matter of active consumption versus passive consumption. So it's an important question for a marketer to consider is, how are people interacting with my brand? Can I hold their attention with static or passively consumed content? Or are they actively interacting with it in a way that's interesting and meets my brand objectives? So the question is, are you doing something together? Or are you just showing them something and then hoping that they click through? And as I said before, touchscreen devices bring a new element of tactile interaction. So now your audience is able to touch your content and actually do something with it and not just click on it to see something else. And in the case of games, they can play with it and have fun with it. So I think just a couple of more slides here on what we know about the audience, then we'll get to some actual practical case studies and applications. And one of Gameloft's advantages, I mean, we're not just a creative shop, we're also a publisher. And we built some inroads into our audience so that we get direct insights from them through in-game surveys and dedicated focus groups. And these are some statistics from a white paper that we did. We interviewed about, I think, a dozen media agency partners and then a ton of our players to assess the impact and the perception of playable ads. So for 75% of the media agencies that responded, playable ads are the ideal format for creating that proximity between a brand and its target. And when it comes to our audience, 90% of our respondents said that they remembered the brand in a playable ad 2 days after they were exposed to the ad. So, very effective results when it comes to brand recall. And this is for a playable ad. So the branded minigame or playable ad is an ad unit. It usually gives an interaction of maybe 30 seconds to 45 seconds, maybe up to a minute. Depending on the level of customization needed and the features needed, we can develop a playable ad for about the same budget and about the same amount of time as a really good video ad. And if your gamified ad design is good and it's fun and it leads to that addictability and multiple immediate repeat engagements from just that one initial click, it can be very successful. So one of our main KPIs for a playable ad is replays. In a really successful campaign, we'll see upwards of 25% replays on completed engagement. So that means that this appears as an optional thing. You don't have to play the gamified ad, but you can play it. The engagement rates are upwards of 30–35% there. And then once the user's completed playing the playable ad, there's a replay button, and that means over 1 in 4 people click to play it again right away. And when we're talking to marketers, we often say to them, what kind of other ad units are you working with right now that will get 1 in 4 people to voluntarily and immediately re-engage with your ad for an additional 30 to 45 seconds? I mean, if you're like a hardcore Marvel fan and there's a Marvel trailer that you've been waiting for, and maybe you're going to watch it a couple of times in a row. But if you think about that, it's really quite powerful that there's that level of engagement with these playables. And the difference here is interaction and not interruption. We're not interrupting what the player is necessarily doing. We're giving them a chance to interact in a fun way with the brand. So a gamified ad can be built in HTML5. So it can run in any network. It can run through direct deals with a publisher like us, or it can run programmatically. In terms of where it can run, it's very flexible, very portable. It can run within a game, okay? It can run on browser. So the mini game can be integrated to your website. It can be integrated into your existing mobile app. And then it can run in other networks. Using an MRAID tag, we can run these ads in any sort of compatible network. And then also we're seeing great opportunities for digital out of home and social media. And I'll show you a few examples of those in a minute here. So how can you start gamifying your campaigns? Well, if you're considering a gamification approach, it's important to work with partners that understand what's going to make a user want to play, understand those core design elements and those core drivers in those game loops. So there's an art that goes along to this, along with the science. And the creation is a little bit more specialized than what you might be used to when it comes to running ads in your other advertising channels. So first and foremost, you need to make sure the final product is tailored to fit your objectives, to fit your brand and fit your message. You want to make sure that it's authentic to your brand. A gamified ad's not the kind of product that you would necessarily pick off a shelf. You have to have a discussion with your partner. You have to validate the design together in order to have the best possible fit with your objectives. And it's really important to keep in mind that you should be mocking it up early and often so that the creation aligns really well with the look and feel of the brand and the target audience and the objectives of the campaign. And it should be an iterative process, and ideally with lots of input, lots of communication, lots of feedback as part of that process. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some case studies. These are things that Gameloft has built and executed. They're in the wild now. So here's the first one, and this is for Fanta. This project came out of Brazil, and it's won a number of awards. But the objective was to promote Fanta's new campaign. It's a 3D animated mouth was their new mascot. We wanted to position Fanta as a fun brand for teenagers. So we created a unique and an innovative game called Snack Saga, where the mouth jumps between platforms and it's eating little snacks and it's consuming Fanta drinks along the way. But the players didn't control the mouth using the touch screen, they controlled it with their voice. So they had to yell Fanta. And the louder they yelled Fanta, the higher the little mouth would jump. And you can see on the screen here, they're making their way through like a platforming game this way. So we developed that feature exclusively for this game for the brand. We had 460,000 unique players for this, resulted in 290,000 minutes played. And that's like somebody shouting Fanta for 202 days straight. So it was a really effective activation. We did it on mobile, but we also did this digital out of home. So we set up the screens with microphones in shopping malls and public places. And we saw that when one person started playing, it was pretty cool. You'd see a sort of crowd of people gathering around and wondering why this person was yelling Fanta, and it became sort of viral in that respect, and it was very effective. And here's another example. Now, this came out of Canada. We found a lot of really cool things come out of our Canadian office, but I mentioned this earlier. So we had run a number of campaigns for Lego, and they were video campaigns, and they were really effective. It was for Lego City playsets. And after these successful video campaigns, we needed to renew the brand experience, to renew interest from our users and keep the performance of the campaign high. So what our team did was we took the existing video asset and edited it together in a very creative way so that then the user could follow on-screen prompts and they'd swipe to see what happened next. You can see what just happened there. So they get to pick the path of what happens next in the video. And in the end, we had 4 different endings available for this video. And it was a perfect fit for high replayability. So the results were over 1 million minutes played. The average dwell time per impression was 40 seconds. And the click-through rate was close to 1.7%, which is really, really high. It was about 50 times higher than the average benchmark for this kind of video. Now, this one's a little bit different. This is what we call a dynamic survey. And this was for a client in France called CSA. They're a traditional polling and surveying company in France, and they wanted to drive engagement amongst a teens and millennial audience to get maximum completion and get good qualitative results. So we know that online polls and online surveys they can be kind of boring. And so we took a really visual and interactive approach to this, created these little cartoony characters, and they live in a little cartoony animated world. And instead of just filling out a box with your answer or checking a box, what you do is you click on the little character that's got the answer that corresponds with your answer, and then they jump up and do a little dance. So it was really a new and innovative way to get that kind of engagement, to get that kind of interest in a format that isn't inherently all that interesting. And the results were really good. The engagement rate was around 30%. Completed engagement over engagement was 35%. And conversion rate on this was 13%. So for a traditional polling company reaching out to teens and millennials, they're pretty impressed with the results of this particular campaign. Okay, and now this is one of my favorite examples. So this was a campaign we did in Vietnam for a company called PS Toothpaste. It's one of the most popular toothpaste companies in Vietnam. So PS Toothpaste wanted to educate kids and educate their mothers about the dangers of hidden sugar hidden in foods where you wouldn't necessarily expect them. And then we also wanted to help them with their toothbrushing techniques. So the solution was we built this game. It's playable through a web browser, but also on mobile. And it was really a virtuous circle. So the idea was you play the game and you try and get as high a score as possible. And PS Toothpaste was offering a prize for the highest score. It was a trip, actually. So you try and get the highest score as possible. You complete the game. And when you complete the game, you get a coupon that you can redeem on an e-commerce site. And we integrated with Vietnam's most popular e-commerce platform, which is called Lazada. So play the game, get the coupon, and then you go to the e-com site and you redeem the coupon and you get a discount on the toothpaste. And then you unlock content within the game. You get a code that unlocks, powered up characters that give you an advantage in hitting that high score. So it really was a circle that drove usage. You play, you get a coupon, you redeem the coupon, and then it makes it easier to get a high score, which gives you a better chance of winning the prize. So we had 400,000 players play the game, 750,000 game sessions. And what's really interesting is that the e-commerce sales went up by 48% for the brand during the campaign. And with the Lazada platform in particular, the sales went up 206%. So in this case, it wasn't just about branding. We have got some real concrete e-com results from effectively tying in gamification to their campaign. Okay, and my last example here is our friend Camille from our HQ. Now, this is something that we did for a brand called Pucelle, and it's a gamified AR filter for Instagram. So you can see that she's controlling the little character by using her head. She's tilting her head one way or the other, and she's opening her mouth, which makes the character jump, and she's trying to make progress on here. So this was a really cool way of integrating gamification to social. And especially if you're engaging with influencers on social, in a lot of cases, they want interesting content. They want something that's going to appeal to their audience. And when these influencers are making the faces and moving their head around and maybe even competing with one another for the high score on the gamified filter, it gives them something cool and engaging to do to catch the interest of their audience. And then we made the filter available to that audience. So if you do something like this, you can link your AR game directly to your brand's social media account. So those are some real world examples. Covered a lot of stuff. I hope I didn't talk too quickly. The takeaway is that, it's very important if you're going to explore gamification, now's the time. The public is open and ready for this. They understand how it works. It's very important to go back to those 3 pillars to make sure your purpose is very clear, make sure your objectives are very clear, and make sure that you work with someone that understands these mechanics and that can bring them to life in a way that's effective and that's authentic to your brand.
Okay, thanks.
Now I'm done.
Yeah, that was great. I'm so sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. That's okay.
From home, I have a cat meowing for attention the entire time that you were talking. So, bad timings. We do have a couple of questions that came through the Q&A box, so sure. Let's get to those. So the first one, to get a game or something like that developed, how long would it take?
Sure. So that entirely depends on the complexity of what it is that you need to do. So when we're talking about a playable ad, we typically give a guideline of maybe between 4 and 6 weeks for something that's fairly basic, and it can really ramp up anywhere from there. We've built a complete experience, a complete app for a major brand, and that was in excess of a year to build this out. But really, we can get something really interesting and really engaging up and running between 4 and 6 weeks.
Great. And another anonymous attendee, with such short attention spans, how can brands balance gamification with simple and direct instructions of interaction?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great question. Excellent question. So what we try and do is we try and use concepts that are going to be recognizable, because it's an excellent point. You don't have a lot of time here. And what you want to do is want to make sure that the game is very simple to understand. It's engaging and fun right off the bat. One of the best practices is to show just a couple of quick, maybe 2 or 3 seconds micro tutorial with some sort of on-screen instruction that shows you what you're supposed to be doing next. But we want to make sure that the game concept itself is fun and easy to understand, but still challenging enough to make somebody want to re-engage with it.
Great. And another question, what are the most effective gameplays?
Yeah, another great question. So when it comes to that recognizable gameplay, we've used running games where you're running along and you have to jump over obstacles. That's really good for entertainment properties where they can, replicate the characters and the settings of whatever movie or TV show that they want to show. Puzzle games, again, are very accessible. A lot of people, a broad audience, will recognize what's supposed to happen when you're playing a match 3 game, for example. So the game concepts themselves can be very clear, can be very simple. It's a lot of times the execution, right? Like the art style and the interface that make the game compelling.
Okay, and I actually have a couple of my own here, and I do work at the IAB. So, are there any guidelines for using gaming elements?
Guidelines in terms of like best practices, you mean?
Best practices.
Sure. So again, I go back to those 3 pillars. So the idea is the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure what you want to accomplish. And as I said, what are the objectives? Are you going to drive to a site? Are you going to try driving social sharing? Is it a pure branding play because you want to build awareness? You want to build your status within a particular audience? So the guideline would be first define your objective. And then the second thing is to make sure that the techniques that you're going to use are concurrent with that objective. So if it's competitive, you want to make sure that there's an easy way to share this within a social circle so you can have your friends compete with you. It's a matter of making sure that your design from the beginning is in line with the objectives of the overall campaign. And then again, working with a partner and doing standard iterations and regular iterations so that you can check the creative and make sure that it's going in the direction that you want it to go before you launch it. doing lots of test sessions, test play sessions between you and your partner to make sure that the final product is going to reflect what it is you're trying to accomplish with the campaign.
Great, thanks. How about, what's the simplest way for a brand to start with marketing gamification?
Sure. Well, I would take a look at what's working for you now, right? So if you're getting a great response on social, this is an avenue that's working for you now. So you can apply gamification to that avenue. So again, we've got this example with the AR lenses for Snap and for Instagram. If you want to see increased engagement on your website, if you want to see more time spent, if you want to drive interest in a product, then focus on your website. If you have some favorite channels that are performing for you well, then look at creating an interactive ad that can capitalize on that. If video is working for you well, take that to the next level and gamify the video, make it more interactive.
Great. I have another question coming through the chat box. How do I get my targeted audience to play the game?
Sure. So there are targeting methods that we use in terms of our first party audience. So we can do age gating and gender gating, and that's when we show the games within our games network. So, there are the traditional targeting techniques that can be used on digital. Again, I think that one of the things that you need to do is make sure that the gamified experience you're building appeals to that audience and appeals to what you want to communicate to that audience as a brand. I'd say go where that audience lives and then find out what you can do to engage in where they are.
Great. And then I don't know if anyone has any other questions to submit, but I have a final one. Where do you see gamification in the future?
Yeah, that's interesting. The term gamification, it might actually just go away. I mean, really, and we've talked to some competitors and some partners about this, but there's still a bit of a misconception around games and gaming and the term gamification, where it almost seems, youth oriented, right? And that's really not the case now. For one thing, the gaming audience is very, very broad. Really, there's a game for everyone, and with free-to-play gaming, that audience is expanded to into senior citizens. I think we all know a grandma or an aunt who plays games all the time, right? So the idea that it's actually related to a game might go away as people adapt to the idea it's the mechanics behind the game that are important. It's that idea of finding out what motivates people and entertains people and makes them create that fun association. That's what's important. It's not that you're necessarily playing a game or playing some sort of cartoony animated thing. So the term gamification might change because it's really the mechanics behind that matter in the way of engaging with people that matter. And I think that you're going to see those processes and those mechanics appear in more and more things. And the Walmart example is a good example. We were talking earlier this week about, maybe partnering with banks to gamify the onboarding process or gamify the process of picking your mortgage out of a list of 12 mortgage options. Really, it's just all about, creating engaging content and then getting people to participate in interacting with it.
Yeah, I mean, you used the example of Duolingo earlier, and I've been trying to learn Portuguese for the last 2.5 years on Duolingo, and I've tried several apps, and it's the only one I've stuck with, and it actually drove me to purchase that year membership.
Oh, great.
I'm available on my hands. So now I'm back to the free, but I do get angry when I get a question wrong and my hearts disappear. So
it works.
And another question has come through. Are gamification game design techniques working on every type of audience?
Well, more or less, yeah, because again, it's not necessarily about a game. It's about finding out what's engaging, finding out what motivates people to interact. So yeah, I mean, I think the way you present, the way you present your gamified technique is going to make a difference between audiences. So it might be a little bit more of an edgy presentation for a younger crowd. It might be more accessible for an older crowd. But again, it's about techniques to motivate people to engage and interact, and then come back and do that again and again and again. So yeah, it's pretty applicable to basically every audience that enjoys being entertained.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's it for questions, but that was great. I mean, I'm certainly your target audience for sure. My boyfriend complains constantly that I play way too many mobile games. So
That's great. Spend money in those.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Anyway, so I just wanted to promote our next conversation for those who are joining us today. Feel free to dial in as well on Thursday, October 22nd at 1 p.m. Our title of our presentation is Channeling an Agile Approach, Facebook Ad Strategies Amid COVID-19, presented by Mintel. The description is, in a COVID-19 economy, marketers must be able to pivot quickly and embrace agility. In this webinar, we will explore how Canadian advertisers across financial services, telecom, retail, and travel adapted their Facebook strategies in the face of market disruptions. Ultimately, we will answer 3 key questions. How has the coronavirus pandemic impacted consumer spending, routines, and habits? How did advertisers shift their ad budgets? And how have advertisers shifted their messaging? So please feel free to join us for that. You can register through the IAB website under the events tab. And thank you again, Casey. Oh, wait, I have 2 questions coming in. Oh, just a thanks, Casey. And a final question. How can gamification be accessible to an example as such as the Fanta example?
Okay, so when it comes to the Fanta example, it was pretty accessible because it was so simplistic in the execution. So you yell at the screen and the little guy jumps, and that's what made it fun.
Great.
I hope that answers the question.
Okay, that was a lot of questions. Engaged audience. Okay, that was great. Thank you again. Hopefully you guys will come back again soon and then give us some updates.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.